Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Hines, the founder and CEO of Functional Fluidics, a biotech company focused on red blood cell health. How are you doing today, Patrick?
I'm doing great, Tony. It's an honor to be here with you today and to get a chance to talk to your audience.
Pleasure to have you here. Now, getting right into things, what inspired you to start Functional Fluidics, and how did your background in pediatric critical care influence that decision?
Great question, Tony. I was inspired to start Functional Fluidics. It started way back when I was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina. And my work as a graduate student was focused on understanding red blood cell biology in ways that no one had really looked at it before. And specifically as it related to people living with sickle cell disease. So what I understand about people with sickle cell disease is that the way that we took care of people was very reactive, right? People came into the hospital in pain and they live with this pain and fatigue that's a part of the nature of this disease. Um, and I always felt like there should be more that we can do um, to prevent these problems, to better understand the disease, so we could come up with better solutions. Because back then there weren't really any treatments. And in fact, when I was in graduate school, my younger sister, who was a student at North Carolina A&T, was dating a young man who we didn't even realize at the time had sickle cell disease, um, ended up passing away in college of sickle cell disease while as a graduate student. And this really put into stark, focus. There's a lot of need here, and this is something I want to devote my career towards.
Mm,
So fast forwarding after that, I continued to do that research in red blood cell health, and really saw this as an opportunity to better understand the biology of this disease in particular, but expanding that to other uh, types of diseases. It's just such a gap in our understanding from a medical standpoint,
mm.
that I really thought that, just based on the research that we were doing, we could really address that and to make a big difference in the lives of people living with sickle cell disease and other diseases and conditions. So that's really what sparked the interest in moving it forward. It was the impact that we wanted to have that later became a business opportunity.
Got it. And the company originated in an academic lab. Could you walk us through how you successfully spun it out of a university setting and turned it into a commercial venture?
Yeah, so I was what you would call a physician scientist. So my physician hat is I'm a pediatric critical care physician. But because I have an MD and a PhD, I have a research lab that does biological research in this area as well. So I saw patients that have a range of different conditions from heart failure, lung failure, neurological failure due to strokes, even though these were kids.
Mm,
But then there's a portion of my patients who are actually people with sickle cell disease. So in terms of where the actual science meets the patient, I saw that in real time in the ICU setting, and I saw people with sickle cell disease who were coming into the ICU with with strokes, with heart failure due to their disease, with extreme pain so severe they had to be managed with continuous pain medicine infusions. And I felt like these are the things that we should be able to prevent, not just react to in this ICU environment. And so the laboratory portion of this is where I did the research in understanding what is it about their biology. And that's where I got into the red blood cell health piece of this that can help us to identify people who are at risk for having these things happen in a way that we can focus on prevention and not reacting to crises. And so I use the scientific part of that hat, what we call translational research, right? How do we study this biology in a way that we can translate it to the patient's bedside? And that's really where the research in an academic environment led to the development of a product that could later be commercialized into something that could be available to reach people in the real world. And so that I couldn't do as an academic physician, right? I could publish papers, I could talk at conferences, but there's patients that I see every day that don't have access to what I'm doing in the lab and what I know. And spinning this out as a startup company, which that was Functional Fluidics back in 2014, gave us an opportunity to help the folks who are developing the medications, the pharmaceutical companies, have access to this technology and develop better drugs and to determine whether these drugs are working. And then ultimately to determine how do we treat patients, people living with sickle cell disease in the real world, because now we have access to this tool that gives us much more insight into the biology of the patients that we're treating. So we're not just experimenting, but we're actually understanding what your biology is and why we're treating you with this medication, which is essentially precision medicine. That's what precision medicine is all about. It's just never been applied to people living with sickle cell disease.
Hmm. And why is red blood cell health such a critical but overlooked aspect of overall health? And like even beyond sickle cell, what other disease areas or applications can your company support or your platform support?
So red blood cell health is so critical because if I take the audience back to high school biology and like I ask my kids, what do red blood cells do? Why are they so important? They carry oxygen from our lungs, so we breathe oxygen in. Lungs are very important. The red blood cells don't deliver it. It doesn't matter. Your tissues and your cells don't get the oxygen they need to survive, and that's a big deal. So, and then they also pick up waste that when our cells are working and they're using that energy that oxygen delivers, they produce waste as a byproduct that the red cells also pick up. That's excreted from the lungs as carbon dioxide and other materials that are picked up as well. So it's foundational to just our health and wellness. The fact that we can sit here and have a conversation. We've got oxygen being delivered to our brains by red blood cells that are working hard every
Hmm.
minute of every day to do that. So then the audience, I would say, would ask themselves a question, well, if these cells are so important, um, why don't we think about this as a vital sign, as something that we measure as commonly as we think about blood pressure or cholesterol or blood sugar? And that's a great question. And ultimately, the technology has just never been developed to be able to assess red blood cell health on a population scale the way that we assess blood pressure and cholesterol and blood sugar and things like that. Part of the reason that we don't is because 20 years ago, if I were to identify in you, Tony, that you had a problem with your red blood cell health or function, um, there's nothing I could do about it. There's no therapy that I could then direct to you that would improve the function or health of your red blood cells. And that's something that didn't change until around 2014, 15, 16, where there was investment in therapies that could actually modify the health of red blood cells. And that's where this becomes an opportunity now to measure red blood cell health, much like we do with the blood pressure. Imagine your doctor taking your blood pressure. Tony, you've got 180 over 100 blood pressure. That's dangerously high. Good luck. That wouldn't be, anything that anybody would be happy about if you measured that and weren't able to provide an antihypertensive in that scenario.
I'm not
So
sure how comfortable I am using me as an example for all these scenarios, though, but go ahead.
yeah, I'm looking at you, and that's I'm fitting you into all of these health scenarios. But you look like a very healthy guy, so I'm sure this is not your issue. But yeah, I mean, it's about is it actionable? Is this data something that we can do something about to improve the condition of the person with that condition that we've identified?
Right.
And now that it's actionable, we've got therapies that are being developed. It's important that we identify people that have these kind of problems with red blood cell health because there's an opportunity to actually do something about it and to improve health and wellness and prevent them from having clinical manifestations of the disease.
Mm.
And we're starting with sickle cell disease as a focal point to show the impact of being able to understand red cell health on an individual person by person basis.
Mm. And beyond sickle cell, what other areas would you be addressing or would you be able to address?
Well, you could imagine just how I described red blood cell health, that this impacts everything, foundational to every process that our body engages in, every organ system from our brain to our heart to our lungs to our liver to our kidneys. But obviously, we're a small company, so we have to be very focused in areas where we think we can deliver the highest value. So that's why we're starting with sickle cell disease, because it is a primary red blood cell disorder. It's a genetic disorder that affects a single gene for a protein called hemoglobin that causes red blood cells to be dysfunctional, especially in conditions where oxygen is low. But other areas where this is important that we think we can actually have an effect are general health and wellness, right? So we think that red blood cell health should be as common of a part of what we understand about our health risk as a blood pressure. So, general health and wellness and establishing red blood cell health across large populations of otherwise healthy people, we think is really important to do. So that's really our next, adventure is going out and trying to assess red cell health across large populations of people. And as a subset of those normal populations, people who participate in high performance sport activities, we think are an important population to look at because that is probably the most healthy red blood cells that we'll identify. And in order to understand the impact of red blood cell health in disease, it's critical that we understand it in health. And so looking at it in that population is important. The other area is in cancer-associated anemias. So there's many cancers, such as blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, things like that, where the cancer itself actually causes you to have a drop in the number of red blood cells that your body has. That's called anemia. That leads to fatigue, severe tiredness. It affects your quality of life. It affects your ability to be able to undergo the treatments for these types of cancers, which oftentimes are chemotherapies. And chemotherapies also can reduce your blood counts as well in ways that can cause similar types of problems. But we really don't understand much about the biology of red blood cells in the context of these anemias. And we believe that if we can identify the health metrics in these red blood cells, that we can significantly improve the experience of people who are living through blood cancers and that are receiving chemotherapy, and that can have an enormous impact. The third area that we're looking at is cardiovascular disease, and specifically something called peripheral artery disease, which is the leading cause of arterial damage in people in the United States and around the world. And in fact, it's the leading cause of what we call limb-threatening ischemia, where we see people who've actually lost uh, feet and toes and legs because of poor circulation. This is exactly what happens with that. And we think that red blood cell health can help us identify people at risk for those type of problems and prevent them from having surgical interventions by intervening early. And then finally, one of the biggest opportunities that we see is something called diabetic retinopathy. So in people living with diabetes, one of the things that often happens is that they can have their vision impacted in a negative way because these small blood vessels that support vision and support the eye can be affected by those high blood sugar levels that can cause damage to those blood vessels that feed the eye. And we have data that show that red blood cell health is actually a determinant of how quickly that process develops. So we think some of the same therapies that are being developed for red blood cell health across sickle cell disease and red blood cell disorders can be applied in health and wellness, in cardiovascular disease, in oncology associated anemias, and in diabetes potentially to be very new and different ways to improve outcomes in people that are living with those type of conditions.
Interesting. And in terms of because I know you mentioned the company is still in the startup phase, but you've recently expanded into Nigeria. Could you share why that was important and what your goals are for that market?
Yes. So Nigeria was really important because the largest population of people in the world living with sickle cell disease are in the country of Nigeria. And in fact, for the companies that are developing therapy for sickle cell disease, just to give you some context, in the United States, there are about 100,000 people in the entire United States with documented sickle cell disease. In the European Union, that number is closer to 60,000. But in Nigeria alone, it's around 6 million individuals
Mm.
living with sickle cell disease, which is a tremendous public health burden, but it's also a tremendous opportunity where we can have the biggest impact on that disease if we can direct some of these therapies to people living in countries like Nigeria, within sub-Saharan Africa, other areas where we see a lot of sickle cell disease, Southeast Asia, South America, the Middle East. But we're starting with Nigeria because that's where the disease burden is the highest. And that's where we have to be able to do better clinical trials. One of the barriers to being able to do clinical trials and approve medications using the populations that we want to treat, folks living in these areas, we have to provide the resources, and our testing platform is one of those resources that's required. So our goal was to be able to make the technology that we've developed accessible in Nigeria to do good clinical trials and make it accessible with a level of quality that is equivalent to what we do in the United States. So the US team and the Nigeria team work hand in hand, and they support each other to provide an equivalent level of testing quality and data quality in both environments so that we can help enable the development of better drugs around the world.
Who would you say are your target clients? Because as a startup, clearly you need to, make money to grow and expand and scale. Who are you targeting?
Yep. So we've focused on the folks developing the therapies, the pharmaceutical companies. So the majority of pharmaceutical companies that are developing red blood cell therapies, then the majority of them are focused in sickle cell disease. We work with either from the early stage development of the compound all the way through the late stage clinical trials, and in some cases in the post-market setting after the drug has been FDA approved and the agency is asking for additional data on people taking the FDA approved drug, we've supported drug companies along that entire continuum. And so that's the main way that we're generating revenue today. We're also supporting agencies like the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, who are doing studies in people with stem cell transplantation as a curative approach to sickle cell disease and defining red blood cell health before and after these types of curative therapies. But in the future, the goal is to be able to make this technology accessible to every healthcare provider that's taking care of a patient in the real world with sickle cell disease and all these other conditions that I described. So they can order those tests as easy as they would order a blood pressure, a cholesterol, a cell blood count. And that model would be we would get basically paid in the same model that any other healthcare service gets paid through insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, private payers. So that will be the future, and that's how we get access to large populations of patients and make the biggest impact on people living with these conditions.
And you did share some of your how the business works. Could you share a little bit more about your current growth journey, and include what kind of support or capital you're looking for to accelerate your impact?
Yeah. So we're what we call the pre-A stage. So we've been able to generate revenue through engaging with our pharmaceutical customers because they've seen value in our ability to define red blood cell health from early stage to late stage. So that's been the primary driver of our revenue. So it's allowed us to be able to exist and to grow and to continue to do research and development, but to be self-sustaining in a way. But because we need to do a lot more investment in infrastructure, in our underlying technology, in our expansion in the U.S. and in sub-Saharan Africa, we have to raise investment capital to be able to do that. And so that is a part of a bridge round that we're currently raising, which gives us the revenue. Well, it gives us the resources to be able to continue to support operations, such that we can raise a larger amount of capital in our A round, which we're hoping to be able to close by the end of the year or early in 2026. So currently we're raising about a 1.6 million in a bridge round that we'd like to close hopefully by the end of the summer. And we're looking for investors, folks that care about what we're doing, but are looking to make an impact and also do well now and also make this a good investment. We think that this is something that is a tremendous opportunity if done right. And we've got the team, the experience to be able to execute on this and to build tremendous amount of value. And so that's the bridge round opportunity that is the nearest term investment opportunity. And then the later opportunity is a A round that's a $12.5 million opportunity that's really going to allow us to scale what we've done and to generate additional value over the next several years.
So for those who are interested in learning more about what you're working on or want to visit your website or get in contact with you, how can they do so?
Yes, so visit our website at www.functionalfluidics.com. And that's I don't know if that's going to be listed at the bottom of the screen, so
Yeah,
I'll have to.
I'll list it in the description in the article and all that.
Perfect. Perfect. And you could also reach me directly at Patrick, Patrick, at functionalfluidics.com. And I'll be happy to share additional information and get you connected, so you can learn more about the company, about our impact, and about the opportunity to build to do something really special that I think can impact health and wellness, starting with sickle cell disease, but in many other conditions and people living around the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your time. Thanks for sharing what you're working on and looking forward to, seeing more growth and success from your company.
Hey, Tony, thanks so much for the time. And again, it's an honor to be able to talk to you and to share this with your audience. So thanks so much.
Thank you. You have a great rest of the day.
You too. Bye bye.
Take care.